We're going to talk today about the importance of food and lifestyle and how that impacts your metabolism and your risk for poor health, chronic diseases of aging, and neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's and dementia. So the outline of the talk is I'm going to give you a little primer about cellular energy metabolism. It's very complicated, and it's gotten more complicated over the last 20 or 30 years. But I think it's important to understand that when you're interested in improving your diet and lifestyle, there's not a single diet, there's not a single lifestyle, but there are consistencies between what is healthy and what is generally not as healthy. That if you are chronically exposed to toxins or certain types of food, that leads to disease. So I'm going to explain that. And then I'm going to look at the types of lifestyles and diets that promote optimal energetics that improve your long-term health. And then we're going to talk about the different food groups and some controversy about acid-base impact of the foods we eat, and what is an alkaline diet and why that's been debunked in the past. And then we're going to talk about environmental toxins, which actually make a lot of things worse. No matter what diet you're on, if you're exposed to environmental toxins, it's getting us into trouble. And then we're going to talk about safer alternatives that we can employ in our lives to hopefully mitigate that risk. So from my previous talks, I've focused on metabolic syndrome and inflammation as a core driver of chronic age-related diseases, not just Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but also heart attack, stroke risk, and cancer risk. And so today we're going to focus on toxins and how that leads to damage from lipid peroxidation, advanced glycation end products. These are when proteins in your body are damaged from too much exposure to glucose in the bloodstream, and other inflammatory ingredients. And then we're also going to talk about what is the difference between a Mediterranean diet and a low-carb versus ketogenic versus a DASH diet, and why the type of diet is really relevant. What's more importantly is what are the micronutrients and how is that impacting cellular metabolism in the foods that we choose to eat. And then finally, how that impacts gut health and your overall tissue metabolism. So this is a very busy slide, and it shows a summary of all of the different metabolic pathways that are very important to optimal energy metabolism. And when things are working well, your cells in your body, they actually have a very low or mildly acidic state that is able to handle oxidative stress. So mitochondria are the primary energy drivers of human metabolism, and eukaryotic metabolism in general. And just to give you a scale, this is one mitochondria. But if you look at the cells in our body, we have some cells that have thousands of mitochondria. So a single cell in your heart might have several thousand mitochondria in one cell. In your brain, maybe have thousands of mitochondria in a neuron. And so when you think about how small a cell is and how important that organelle is in the cell to actually providing the energy substrates needed for protein metabolism, to make enzymes. Enzymes create reactions that provide signaling and build new tissue, muscle, but not only muscle, your liver, your kidneys, your brain, all of that energetic activity is necessary for us to have a full and active lifestyle, and also to protect us from disease and to repair ourselves when we're injured. So if we look at the mitochondria in the center, there are a number of activities that are going on there that are very important for optimal metabolism. And when that mitochondria is not functioning properly, it starts to lose its structural integrity. And that is generally related to excessive oxidative stress. Your cells in the mitochondria are designed to tolerate that stress very easily when everything is working well. But when we expose ourselves to toxins, or if we're eating the wrong kinds of foods on a regular basis, the amount of reactive oxygen species from normal oxidative metabolism goes way up. And that damages the membranes of these organelles, and eventually they get so deranged they don't work well. And that's been postulated to actually be the trigger for cancer. And we'll talk a little bit about that more later. But to say that the mitochondria are the only source of energy is not true. Because certainly cancer cells grow very well and very efficiently without the mitochondria providing very much energy. And that's because of these pathways that occur in the cytoplasm of the cell. And on your right, there's a very preserved pathway called glycolysis, where glucose is our primary energy substrate. We get that from our food. You think of sugar. Sugar's 50% glucose, 50% fructose. And the glucose gets converted efficiently in this pathway into a substrate that ends up going into the mitochondria. And through this oxidative pathway, where we're using oxygen to accept the electrons through this electron transport chain, that process produces a lot of energy efficiently, with some production of reactive oxygen species that our body handles very well. Now, when the metabolism isn't working well, if we have stress, the mitochondria aren't working well, then the cells tend to lean more toward this glycolytic pathway, where at the very end, instead of that substrate going into the mitochondria to form an efficient amount of energy, it gets converted into lactic acid. And lactic acid doesn't produce that process doesn't produce nearly as much energy, and it creates acidification inside the cell. And that happens to a much more dramatic degree in cancer. And so cells that are operating efficiently, they use glycolysis to produce a substrate that goes into the mitochondria, and that gets efficiently converted into energy, and we want that to be very efficient. And unfortunately, some of the toxins we expose ourselves to damage the mitochondria, or the foods we eat create insulin resistance, and the mitochondria just aren't working as well. And that's where metabolic disease comes into play. So we're talking about metabolic syndrome and diabetes and the consequences of diabetes, which includes heart disease, stroke, cancer, and downstream even neurodegenerative diseases like dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. There are other pathways. So it turns out, let's see, if we look at the different substrates that go into our optimal cellular metabolism, the most common being glucose. Fructose can also be used for energy. Glutamine can be used for energy. And what we found even very recently, one of the leading investigators in cancer research, Thomas Seyfried, has recently reported that they think that glutamine is actually fermented, just like glucose can be fermented. And what that means is that the mitochondria are not necessary, that oxygen is not necessary, that these are converted into substrates that can produce energy, and that's how cancer cells love to grow. And that's something called the Warburg effect, when cancer cells are able to produce enough energy through fermentation in order to grow rapidly and survive. And so to prevent cancer, we want the mitochondria to be working very well, efficiently, so that oxidative phosphorylation, this oxidative metabolism, is the dominant metabolism. And that just doesn't occur as well on a standard American diet. Well, I'll explain that in a minute. So some of the energy and acid-based impact of these different substrates has been described. And whether or not acid or base metabolism plays a role in chronic diseases has not been very well established. But it is important to recognize that there aren't enough studies that really tell us. But when you are, especially cancer, when the cells are predominantly using glycolysis and lactic acid as their energy source, that creates a more acidic state. And that's acidic extracellularly, as these cancer cells have learned how to push the increased acid production in the cell out into the extracellular tissue. But ultimately, it's a more acidic metabolism when you're dealing with cancer cells. And you don't really want that in normal metabolism either. So we're using cancer cells as an indicator of what happens in normal, or we'll say suboptimal metabolism. People that have metabolic syndrome diabetes have more problems with a glycolytic dominant metabolism, and that is more acidic. And then in cancer cells, the glutamine is actually the way that the cells compensate for all that additional acidic metabolism by converting glutamine into substrates that neutralize the acid inside the cell. And then the glutamine actually goes backwards into the mitochondria. It doesn't go through oxidative phosphorylation. It instead goes backwards in the TCA cycle and produces some energy that the cancer cells can live off of in the absence or in suboptimal oxygen environment. So some of the other substrates that we are very important for our normal metabolism include fatty acids, and those are generally considered neutral. Creating energy from them is highly efficient, and so that actually helps your mitochondrial metabolism when you're consuming healthy fats in the context of a well-balanced diet that is devoid of toxins and highly refined foods. Beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate are the major energy substrates from a ketogenic diet and lifestyle. So if we are restricting our carbohydrate intake, our liver compensates by producing these substrates for the rest of your body. And these are highly efficient and also alkalinizing. So it just coincidental, maybe not, but it turns out that several of these substrates are highly efficient at producing energy, but lead to a less acidic or more alkaline intracellular environment. And that turns out to have some benefits. So here are several other substrates. Now, interestingly, you find more of these in plant-based foods. These do not raise blood glucose levels. They do not influence insulin resistance, and they can be used for energy. And it also so happens that these are generally highly efficient at producing energy and also relatively net alkalinizing intracellularly. Now, alcohol, we all know alcohol is generally not healthy, especially when you drink alcohol in excess. And part of the reason why is it produces acetaldehyde, which is inflammatory and toxic directly. And it also, when it's metabolized by your body, most of it has to be converted into fat in the liver. And if you are healthy and everything's working optimally, then your body can tolerate a little bit of alcohol every once in a while. But generally, alcohol has negative impacts on your metabolism, and it's either mildly to moderately acidic. So if you have more of a standard American diet, and you have metabolic syndrome or diabetes, and you're drinking a lot of alcohol, that actually creates a moderately acidic metabolism, and it can be even worse than that. Alcohol can kill you, and if you drink too much, it can cause severe metabolic acidosis that can be life-threatening. So the standard American lifestyle, unfortunately, it is very high in toxic additives, pesticides, herbicides, and these things have been shown to damage the mitochondria and reduce the efficiency of this normal, healthy oxidative phosphorylation or oxidative metabolism, and limits your ability to protect yourself from excess oxidative metabolites that damage the membranes, including the mitochondria. And it leads to this more of a glycolysis dominant acidic metabolism and that's not desirable. You don't want to have that kind of metabolism every day, all day. But if you're healthy, if you're normal, and you're eating a well-balanced diet, and occasionally you encounter foods that are going to stress your system, it's very easy for your body to adapt to that and recover from it. Not the case if you're constantly exposing yourself to these things. So why is it that the Mediterranean diet is such a popular diet that cardiologists, a lot of doctors point to? And what is a Mediterranean diet? And sometimes it's hard to explain. They say it's high in vegetables and fruit and fish. But ultimately, I've been to Europe. You see a lot of people there eating bread and that they have croissants and all kinds of starchy carbohydrates. But as a rule of thumb, they eat a lot less toxins in their food than the standard American diet. They pass regulations that limit a lot of the toxins in the food supply that we still don't have. And then on top of that, the types of foods they're eating are high in micronutrients. They're high in alkalinizing substrates. Whether or not that's important, we'll have to decide for ourselves, because there's just not enough research to say for sure. But I'll make some cases that it's probably better to lean toward a plant-based or alkalinizing diet and lifestyle to protect your mitochondria. And then there are doctors like myself that have promoted a well-formulated ketogenic diet for many years. And there's some value to that type of lifestyle. In a well-formulated diet, if we're talking about more plants, fruits and vegetables that are low net carb, that means that they don't have a lot of sugar, they don't have a lot of easily digestible starches, and you're eating in a way that minimizes the increase in insulin, and that leads to your liver producing ketones that your brain and your body can run on. That's a well-formulated ketogenic diet. There are other ketogenic diets like the Atkins diet. You can create deep ketosis if you just eat bacon, egg, and cheese 3 times a day, or just eat eggs. In fact, there's a story of a gentleman that it was published in the literature that he ate 24 eggs a day for years, and that's all he ate. So he was a little bit psychotic, I would say. And it turns out when they did his blood work was completely normal. His cardiovascular system, all his pipes were clean. He was very healthy, with the exception that he did have dementia. So, so it doesn't mean that eating a ketogenic diet like an Atkins diet or just eating eggs, because eggs is simply protein and fat. There are no carbohydrates. But that also tells you something, that carbohydrates are not necessary for life. You can live for as long as you want just eating meat and eggs without a single carbohydrate or any fiber in your diet. And this gentleman was in his 80s, and he'd been doing this for 10 years. So maybe he was schizophrenic, I don't know, but he was at a state of dementia where, they didn't go into his past history and lifestyle. So, how can we put together what is beneficial about a Mediterranean lifestyle, what is beneficial about a ketogenic lifestyle, and try to figure out what are the common themes. So, there are, of the food groups, if you look at whole food protein sources, they all generally increase your renal acid load, or how much acid is produced in metabolism. But protein is necessary for life, and so is oxygen. Oxygen from the air, oxidative stress. When your mitochondria are producing energy for your body to run on, it's creating oxidative toxic metabolites, and your body is designed to handle that, in reasonable levels without a problem. It's just when that gets out of control and the mitochondria become damaged that we see more and more problems. So we want protein in our diet. We don't necessarily want a lot of protein, but generally looking at the literature, I'd say between 80 to 120 grams of protein a day is a reasonable amount. More if you're male, and larger, body, more muscle. Somewhat less if you're female, but you need enough. And so My current thinking is 80 to 120 grams is the minimum goal. And then the whole foods and healthy fats, these are just neutral as far as their acidity and their risk for inflammation, and essential fats are necessary for life. So you want to avoid refined processed oils, especially deep fried foods, because the oil has been damaged, it's carcinogenic, it's toxic, it's going to create that oxidative stress that's going to damage the mitochondria and lead to more problems. And then whole food carbohydrates, these are not necessary for life, but there are a lot of useful compounds that you get from plant-based foods that have these carbohydrates. So I'm not saying don't eat carbohydrates. I am saying that you want to avoid refined carbohydrates. That's why each of these says whole food. Because if you're eating whole food from the get-go and you're avoiding toxins in the environment, you're probably not going to have nearly as many problems over your life. So if we look at the different types of whole food carbohydrates, the whole food vegetables and fruits have a much higher content of those useful substrates that lead to a more net alkaline intracellular environment. And that's beneficial for mitochondrial metabolism. And it does not cause insulin resistance. Also, the micronutrients that you find in plant-based foods, you do find these in animal foods that, like whole meats, liver. If you're on a carnivore diet and you're eating liver and you're eating meat and eggs and dairy, you're getting a lot of micronutrients from all those things. But if you're just eating processed meats, you're not getting the liver, you're not getting the nutrition from the eggs and the dairy, from grass-fed, free-range sources where the nutrients or micronutrients are much higher. You don't necessarily need carbohydrates, but that's not what we're dealing with. So I think you can have a combination diet, and that is basically what the well-formulated ketogenic diet is. And then it's just deciding what degree and how often do you need to follow those lifestyle patterns to get the benefit, so that when you make mistakes, that you get away with it. So we want to rethink what is the debunked alkaline diet. And this one is looked at, it's been looked at for probably 20 or 30 years. There hasn't been really any randomized controlled trials that look at, what is the long-term impact of trying to do one of these diets. So I really don't think there's enough data to say that choosing fruits and vegetables over meats and foods that are lower in micronutrients that produce more acid, there's not research that says for sure one way or the other. It hadn't been done yet, but there are associations. So what we're interested in is what's going on inside the cell that's damaging the mitochondria, and how can we improve that? So on a standard American diet, the foods are low in micronutrients. If they're processed, that means that the grains, they've removed the bran, they've removed, where all of the magnesium, the potassium, the zinc, all of the healthy substrates. That's why when you buy a box of Cheerios, you see that they've enriched it, or you buy a loaf of bread, they enrich it because it's so low in micronutrients, they have to add it back in. So that's not the way to eat. So when you have these low micronutrient foods, they generally are more acidic in terms of what happens inside the cell, and that tends to lead more toward mitochondrial dysfunction. And then when you look at the healthier lifestyles like the Mediterranean diet and a well-formulated ketogenic diet, you have a lot more vegetables, healthy fats, whole foods that are great sources of the micronutrients that we need, so that the mitochondria are able to function more optimally and hopefully withstand those times that we can't avoid toxins in our environment. So it was interesting that in 2021 there was an article written by a researcher in Iran, where they looked at all the literature and they tried to categorize which foods were more acidic and more alkaline with regard to your overall metabolism in your venous blood. And this was not, a leading journal, but I thought it was interesting because there were many journals or many articles that were pointed to create this diagram, and you can see that most of the healthier plant-based foods are on the right side of the diagram, and those are the ones that are more associated with a Mediterranean and well-formulated ketogenic diet, whereas on the left, the strongly acidic foods are the processed and highly refined foods. And so I thought that was interesting. And so we want to avoid those regardless of whether or not it has anything to do with acid-based metabolism in the cell. But I do think that there's a case to be made that acidity that results from that type of metabolism inside the cell as it exports the acid into the extracellular space, it is related and associated with that, with declining mitochondrial function. And so this high acid diet is associated with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular risk. Does it mean it causes it? No. But I don't think that they can say with certainty that they debunked, eating an alkaline diet is favorable. And certainly one of the authors of this paper actually tested this theory on himself. He's an N of 1, which means it wasn't really good science because you need a large number of people to do this, and it's not fun. But he did it, and he repeated it again a year later and got the same results. That when he was on the alkaline diet, eating foods more on the right side of this table from the weak acid, then you could find plenty of foods like fish and chicken that have a lot of protein that are weakly acidic. And then when you eat these other weak alkaline, medium alkaline, and strong alkaline foods, that's going to offset any acidity from the protein. And the net effect is a more alkaline systemic metabolism. And in this study, they showed that his oxygen utilization was much better. His pulse oximetry was much, much higher than when he ate the opposite of that, which is basically the standard American diet: fried potatoes, eating lots of processed meats and pastries, pasta, cereal, and frying oil. That all of that led to a much more impaired metabolism. So, what are the potential benefits if we can move our bodies toward a more alkaline intracellular metabolism? Well, nitric oxide is an important signaling hormone. It's a gas. It was discovered, I think, in the late 90s. And that pathway is essential for good circulation. It helps relax your blood vessels. It helps the smooth muscle remodel in a favorable way. It also triggers reduced inflammation. It activates stem cell metabolism. So it's very important for healing injuries, and it's also very important just for breathing and opening up your airway. And so anything we can do to improve nitric oxide production as we age is a benefit. And it just so happens as we age, nitric oxide production declines. And a lot of times the first sign of that in men is poor erectile function, but it also affects women too. And so you don't heal as well, and you have a lot more problems exchanging oxygen, and that's going to impact the quality of sleep. A lot of important metabolic impact from not producing nitric oxide efficiently. Nitric oxide synthase is the enzyme that produces nitric oxide. It just so happens it produces it much more efficiently in an alkaline intracellular environment. And that's not just for that enzyme pathway. Many enzyme pathways, including glycolysis, function much better under alkaline conditions. And so if glycolysis is happening better, nitric oxide is happening better, this has been linked with a lower risk for insulin resistance. So the glucose comes into the cell, it goes easily through the glycolytic pathway, and then goes to the mitochondria to create abundant energy. When you're creating abundant energy, you're young, you're healthy, you're vibrant, you're able to do everything you want to do, you enjoy your life more. Whereas as you age, all of these systems decline. And as they decline, you feel it. You have more depression, anxiety, fatigue, pain. You don't recover from injuries. So that's important to note. And then more alkaline environment improves your exercise metabolism. So you're able to tolerate exercise much better. Your endurance is 20 to 25% better if you're eating a more alkaline diet. So all that together suggests to me that the types of foods, the impacts, micronutrients, and net alkaline nature of the foods probably do play an important role in protecting us from aging in general and age-related disease. So what are the strategies that we can employ instead of just saying, okay, you're going to get on a DASH diet, you're going to get on a Mediterranean diet? What things can we learn from this that are generally impacting all of these diets, the good versus the bad? You have to avoid toxins as much as possible. I think when you have a healthy, flexible metabolism and you're exposed, say you go out to eat and you're exposed to a small amount of pesticide, it's one of the ingredients in the foods, or maybe even the whole meal, hopefully it's low, then your body is going to sustain a small injury from that, but you'll be able to recover, especially if you're exercising and you have this healthy metabolism that promotes new mitochondria. So if there are there are always some healthy mitochondria. Those will divide and help to replace a mitochondria that are damaged. What you don't want is to let all your mitochondria get damaged to an extent that it becomes irreparable. That can turn into cancer, or the cell will kill itself. And then you end up losing tissue. And so we find that people who are on these standard American diets of highly processed foods, that they more rapidly lose muscle mass and lean mass in general. And that doesn't include just muscle. That's kidney, liver, brain, everything shrinks. So we want to get away from the standard American diet and the toxins that are in it. So you have to exclude the highly refined, ultra-processed carbohydrates, as I see people eating chips. But, like I said, once in a while, you can get away with it. And limit starchy carbohydrates to smaller portions. That means even on a well-formulated ketogenic diet, you can eat starchy carbohydrates, but you can't make it the largest part of the meal. You want to clothe the carbs with other foods, particularly fat. Fat is very good at hiding carbohydrate in a food bolus. So when you eat a complete meal, start with a salad. It can have a little bit of fatty dressing on it if you like. If you're trying to lose weight, you might want to cut back on the amount of fat that's in the meal. But you need fat, so that still needs to be a significant percentage of the meal. But you'll see on a future slide that you can get a lot of food with a pretty low caloric intake. So it's possible to do this, not feel hungry, and lose weight if you're trying to reverse metabolic syndrome, the obesity, the hypertension, the inflammation, high triglycerides, all of those things that lead to illness later in life and make you feel lousy in the now. So the other thing you can do is implement fasting techniques. So if you don't eat at breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack before bed, you'll be way better off. Some of the, I would say, thought leaders, they change their minds. Sometimes they say skip breakfast. Some people think you should eat breakfast and make lunch the biggest meal of the day and have a small dinner. But most people agree that it's good to have what they call time-restricted feeding, which is a form of fasting where you don't really eat any protein, carbohydrate, fat for at least 8 to 12 hours of the day. And so I think that the easiest way to accomplish or get the most out of that is have your smallest meal of the day be supper, so that you actually, your body converts toward a fasting state before you go to bed, and then you delay breakfast until after 10 a.m. So if you do that, you're going to teach your body to go into a fasted state. And as your body adapts to this over time, which can be difficult, because as I said, people on a standard American diet, they have a glycolytic dependent metabolism. And so what that means is to turn that metabolic switch that teaches your liver how to produce ketones, that your brain loves to run on ketones. The primary energy supply is generally glucose, But if you're adapted and your liver can flip into producing ketones easily, then your body feels fine in a fasted state. You're not hungry. If you just keep up with hydration, electrolytes, you can go a whole day without eating, without feeling bad if you have to. And that's the way we were. Primitive man, hunters and gatherers. Sometimes they'd go days without eating, and they weren't, they'd have to get bad enough where they were become cannibals, right? But most of the time, they could go a day or more or several days without eating and still feel fine. So we want to exercise regularly because that stimulation of exercise actually produces an acidic state in the cells. Oxygen is depleted when you exercise. You actually take the glucose and form lactic acid with it like a cancer cell. And you use that energy, but the cells wear out, the muscles get tired, you can't do anymore when you run out of energy. But in a normal cell that's healthy, that has good oxidative metabolism, it can run on fat too. So we know this from endurance athletes, people that have tried to climb Mount Everest, that are on a ketogenic diet, a well-formulated ketogenic diet, that there was someone who did this years ago, where before they switched to a ketogenic diet, they couldn't make it to the top of Mount Everest. But after they switched their lifestyle to a ketogenic diet, they were easily able to make it up to Mount Everest. That's because that is the most efficient metabolism at producing energy, and creates the least oxidative stress, and it improves your endurance. You're not going to be a competitive power lifter on a ketogenic diet, but you will potentially be able to outrun or outlast other sports. So you want to choose the organic whole food meals, because that hopefully avoids toxins in the food supply. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily where the greatest source of toxins are. I'm going to get to that in a minute. All right, so as part of our practice now, we try to see patients frequently, and we try to design a holistic approach to improving their metabolic health, not just give them drugs, 15-minute visits where we adjust your symptomatic medication and we'll see you in 3 or 6 months. That's not how we operate here. So we're trying to find innovative ways to teach people how to change their metabolic state so that they have better symptoms in the now and less risk for disability in the future. And this is an example of that. We create a spreadsheet for all of our patients where we have tabs for things like your medications, your supplements, hormone optimization. There's another one for sleep diary, and there's a food diary, and then there's also a meal plan tab. And this is an example of a meal plan tab. And you can see this, this might be somebody that's got diabetes, it's overweight, this has a lot of inflammation, and we want to radically get them into a better metabolic state as quickly as possible. And so this would be a well-formulated ketogenic diet. Now, for someone who doesn't cook, that is used to going out to eat twice a day, and you have to make your own food to do this. So if you just look at this, we've chosen a more sustainable path, where depending on the severity of your metabolic illness, that you could do a more strict, well-formulated ketogenic diet 3, 4, or 5 days in a row, and then party on the weekends. So what that means is, 2 or 3 days a week, you don't go overboard, but you can eat a little more carbohydrate. If you go out to eat, you can cheat a little more. It's the consistency that matters. It's just like an exercise. If you exercise once a month, it's not going to do anything. Once a week, you're going to get some benefit, but you may not actually build much. Twice a week, you start actually improving your physiology. So like that, in the same manner, diet is the same way. If you just have one healthy meal, it's not going to do anything. If the one before it, and the dessert right after it, and then the snack before bed, you're just not going to change your physiology. But the science shows this, that if you convert to a more optimal diet and lifestyle, even if you're diabetic, severely diabetic, exception for type 1 diabetes, that's a whole other conversation. But for type 2 diabetics, if you gradually introduce them into this diet and lifestyle, they can become efficient at burning fat and improve their mitochondrial efficiency, their liver's ability. Liver is loaded with mitochondria. So you need a lot of healthy mitochondria for the liver to do its job. And over the course of 4 or 5 days, the liver gets healthier and it starts producing more ketones, the beta hydroxybutyrate and the acetoacetate. And as that occurs, your whole body starts to adapt to burning fat. And so you lose weight, but you're also, in a non-toxic way, those fats are neutral, they're producing a lot of energy, and it's helping your cells to become healthier and to stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis, producing new healthy mitochondria. You're actually getting a little younger doing this. Now, if you go overboard, you can lose too much weight, and so you want to do it where you're getting the micronutrients and you're eating enough protein and you're exercising. So there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. So on the bottom where you see 7, this is an example of a cheat day where you might add more sweet potatoes or more starchy carbohydrates that give you more variety. But even if you go overboard, say you go out to eat and you go to a Mexican restaurant, you will have learned from the first 4 or 5 days of the week that you don't really need all those chips. You don't need to eat a basket of bread before you even eat your meal. That you minimize that. But if you want to have a little bit of bread, you have a little bit of bread. Maybe you eat a salad to minimize the impact of that. But you gradually learn, what are the toxins in the food. They're not toxins just by themselves. It's just the amounts and how frequently you expose yourself to it. And then hopefully, if you're only going out to eat a couple times a week, you're not getting all the pesticides and the herbicides every day, all day. So this is a simpler version that we're for patients we're trying to that can't cook for themselves so easily. There are meal plans that you can get. We create two metabolic drinks here. One is a meal replacement drink. The other is a electrolyte drink. Contains a lot of those energy substrates like citrate, citrulline. There's a bunch of things that improve your energy metabolism, nitric oxide. It's not whole food, but for people who can't cook for themselves, it's a way to get nutrient-dense food that is relatively low in caloric density that will keep you full. And then there are meal plans you can get now that are actually pretty good. We use Factor 75 just because it's affordable. And the only downside to Factor 75 is it's not completely organic, so you are exposing yourself to some potential for pesticides and herbicides, and they serve it in a black plastic container. So what we do is we recommend that you don't cook it in that you remove it, put it on a ceramic plate or Pyrex and just cook it without the plastic. It's really the heating up of plastics that releases all of these toxic microplastics, which we'll get to in a minute. I need to leave some time for questions. So, environmental mitochondrial toxin. That's I wanted to put this up first, but the diet is so important. This is probably equally important. But the fact of the matter is we are exposed to toxins everywhere. And in Europe, they are too, but it's not nearly as bad. They put some regulations in place that limit a lot of the toxins. We haven't done that in the United States. So it affects our crops. The cows eat the crops, so it's everywhere. So the more you can eat organic, the better to avoid these things. But it's also in the air. So where are these things found? So our agricultural areas and the food supply, urban industrial areas. It turns out pollution, just the rubber from tires releases all kinds of polyethylene, and you're breathing in this stuff. And so to limit that as much as you can, obviously we have to go outside, but you can do something about that at home. And so it's just recognizing where the problems are, and then hopefully pushing politics to help remove some of this from the environment, because this is all man-made. And then contaminated water and soil. So, even if you're getting organic foods from an organic farm, some of these pesticide residues can be there for years. So they test them, they're in small amounts. The government says that's okay because it's below the threshold of concern. They're not using pesticides and herbicides there anymore, but it's not pesticide free. Now, in and of itself, if you're washing your fruits and vegetables, you're really reducing that a lot. If you're soaking your rice and beans and things like that overnight with a little bit of baking soda, Some people use vinegar spray to wash their vegetables. All these things I think can help reduce some of the toxic exposure, and that's important. And then finally, industrial consumer products. So just some plastics, and we'll have a video here in a second, but just striking how much plastic is in our life, including the Coke cans and so on. So I'll get to that in a minute. But it's these forever chemicals and the BPA and all the the polyethylene. All these things are present, and they all seem to damage the mitochondria, cause oxidative stress, endocrine disruptors that indirectly cause oxidative stress, mitochondrial damage. So in Parkinson's, which is my main emphasis of my career, the first 20 years at least, has been trying to understand how all this ties together with Parkinson's disease. And a recent study just published in the last year, they postulate, and I met the author at a CME lecture I went to a few weeks ago, and he said it. He thinks Parkinson's is a man-made disease, more likely than not. It's hard to see this, but in the center you can see pesticides, toxins in the diet, in the well water, air pollution, very common industrial solvents like trichloroethylene, PCBs, many others. That this is all in our environment, and that you inhale it on your right, or you ingest it on the left, and they're postulating in this article that depending on where you get the majority of your toxic exposure, either you ingest it or you inhale it, gives variable Parkinson's presentations. And some people are just exposed really substantially one time. Maybe they were chasing a mosquito truck or working on a farm and spraying Roundup, and that smells nice. And so you have to protect yourself. And certainly there are protective equipment you can use, but ultimately it's better to avoid it entirely. So another piece of bad news is that what the government says is safe at a low level, if you're exposing yourself to multiple low-level insults all day, they have an additive compounding effect. So 2 or 3 toxic exposures of different chemicals at the same time can damage your mitochondria and cause oxidative stress, and it's harder to recover from that, especially if it's bad enough where the neurons kill themselves or other tissues are damaged. So this showed on that recent study that if you live within a mile of a golf course, you have a 126% chance of getting Parkinson's. So that's more than double the risk. And then if you're getting water service from areas around, you have double the risk. And then if it decreases by 17% for each mile away from the golf course. That's pretty stunning. And the reason that is, more than likely, is because they use tons and tons of herbicides and pesticides. Paraquat, we're going to pick on paraquat here in a little bit because it's still a very common toxin used in the United States. It's been banned in Europe, and there's no hope in sight. There's no intention to get rid of that in the United States anytime soon. And so that's the concern. We've got to eat the right diet so that we can protect ourselves from the toxins that are damaging our metabolic health. Now, this is from that same article, and it shows on the upper left corner, what is the incidence of Parkinson's in the United States? If you look at Colorado, there's not a lot of Parkinson's there. And it just so happens, if you look over here, where are the highest concentrations of the chemicals, that the solvents used in the industry for chemical industries, and there's just not a lot of that in Colorado or Wyoming. And so this on the left is the cases per 100,000. Plenty of people live in Wyoming and Colorado, but there's very little Parkinson's, particularly in Wyoming. So why is that? And then we look at these on the lower left. You can see the agricultural use of paraquat and how closely that mimics where the population centers are. And then over here on the right, you can see where everybody lives. Okay. So you have a much higher the number of diagnoses per 100,000 is fixed. You have a lot more people living in areas where there are pesticides and industrial solvents that we know are toxic to mitochondria. So you can make your own conclusions. That's association science is generally not as good science, but I don't think we should ignore it. It's kind of the elephant in the room. So I'm not going to go over all the toxins, but there are a lot of them, and they all cause oxidative stress, inflammation, and either directly or indirectly damage the mitochondrial metabolism. And so that's why we need a holistic approach. And that's why, the way institutional medicine is going is not in that direction. So we really need more doctors to practice independently and to give the time that's needed to identify these problems and educate patients and lead them in the right direction. And it's not for completely selfless reasons. I mean, I don't want to abuse myself. The more I learn and share this with others, it helps me, my family, my friends. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I hope this was interesting and helpful. And certainly I'm happy to stick around and answer questions.